Hello and welcome to the Reason Roundtable. This is the podcast of free minds, free markets, and free takes. I'm your host, Peter Suderman, and today I am joined by my illustrious colleagues, Katherine Mangu-Ward, Nick Gillespie, and special guest, Reason's very own Eric Boehm. Everyone say hello.
Howdy.
Hello.
Happy Monday, Peter.
Happy Monday.
This is why we need a leader.
Yeah. Happy Monday and happy birthday to America. Libertarians don't love leaders is what I've heard, or at least not in the government. And we're going to talk about that today. We're going to talk about a lot of things we don't like about American politics later on in this show. But I want to start with a reflection on what makes America great. So I am not by nature a patriotic person, but the older I get, the more I just love America. Yes, America is an imperfect place. Too many flaws, past and present, to mention here. But it was founded on a great idea. We hate kings, we hate taxes, and we love individual liberty. Our lives are our own to make or mess up as we please. And more than any other country or region in the world today, we are still getting it right. You can see that in our economy, which has continued to grow even as Europe has stagnated. You can see that in our approach to innovation, technologies like AI, in pop culture, which we export all around the world. And you can see it in our approach to free speech, which offers more freedom than just about anywhere else in the world to say whatever you like on a podcast. So yes, we do have a lot of problems in America, especially in our politics. And I worry a lot about the future of this nation. I know that some libertarians are not always fond of the idea of countries, of nations at all. I get it, Katherine. But I am also bullish on America and the American idea. Because as imperfect as it is, if you want life and liberty and the pursuit of happiness, well, after 249 years, it is still the place to be. So, Katherine, since I name-checked you, how are you feeling this 4th of July Monday about the old US of A?
I continue to feel really bad about governments, about states, about taxation. And so I therefore love a holiday that is based at least in part in opposing all those things. I also just feel really good about Americans. Like, we are not our government. We are not the state. And Americans as a people, we have our bad days. But I think when you look at the ability to live together with people that we radically disagree with, we are still pretty top tier at that. And so I want to give credit to the American people. Screw the government.
Nick, how are you feeling about patriotism here? I know you're like maybe you want to talk about Italy.
No, not at all. So bold though to
New Jersey.
Praise the American people, but not its government. What I'm most worried about is that we traded in Joe Biden and a government that was suppressing speech through jawboning and other means for a new government, which is trying to, is primarying and threatening, everybody who goes against the president. What disturbs me, it's easy to say, America is the greatest country in the world, and I think that's always true. But what frightens me the most is that we're entering a period now where on the right to disagree or contradict or to criticize or critique the president or the Republican agenda is somehow tantamount to treason. And you see Biden going after saying he's going to primary Thomas Massie because he voted against the big, beautiful bill. We have a government that, where people, members of ICE and Border Patrol are putting on masks and picking people up on the street without even identifying themselves. This is a time to be extremely critical of the American government because it's really fouling the American project, which is the thing that is really important.
Eric, how are you feeling about the idea of America and the American project right now?
I think I feel most patriotic about America, not necessarily on the 4th of July, but when I watch the Olympics or the World Cup. And if the U.S. men's national team had beaten Mexico last night to win the Gold Cup, which is the North American Regional Soccer Championship, I would be feeling much more patriotic. Unfortunately, we lost. Mexico won 2-1. So I think to pick up on what Nick said, I think the most important thing about America and what Katherine said is our ability to criticize and call out government abuses, especially when they occur. This is foundational to the country. This is literally the point of the Declaration of Independence, which after some of the flowery language at the beginning gets down to brass tacks and just lays out all of the ways in which the King of England was at the time abusing the colonies. And 4 of the lines in there, which are back to back to back in the document, jump out to me on this July 4th, especially. for cutting off our trade with all parts of the world, for imposing taxes on us without our consent, for depriving us in many cases of the benefits of trial by jury, and for transporting us beyond seas to be tried for pretended offenses. These are things that they were moral violations, they were civil violations, they were problematic in 1776. They remain so today, and we should continue to criticize the government for engaging in much of this same behavior that our founders would have recognized as abusive and worth rebelling against.
Speaking of violations, I violated good taste this weekend. I had Miller Lite beer can chicken flavor Pringles. This is a real thing. It's a limited edition. Ate them while I watched fireworks on the beach. America just keeps on winning. And so do fans of the Reason Roundtable. We're going to be coming at you live in New York City next week on Tuesday, July 15th at the Village Underground, which means that this show might be a couple of days late in your feed. If you want to come see us live in real life IRL, you can still get tickets at reason.com/events. We're going to be talking about the news and answering your questions. It's going to be a hot one and a fun one, just like July 4th. Speaking of which, Donald Trump celebrated America's birthday by signing the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. The Big Beautiful Bill is now a big, beautiful law. The $3 trillion package will keep individual tax rates at current levels. It will reduce planned future spending, particularly on Medicaid, which is scheduled for a $1 trillion haircut over the next decade, if those cuts go into effect. And because it will reduce expected revenues by more than it cuts spending, it will add $3 trillion to federal debt and deficits compared with doing nothing, and possibly a whole lot more if some of the temporary provisions are extended. This is, of course, on top of persistent structural deficits that are already larger than at any time in history outside of a crisis. So my worry is that this bill and the long history of budget-busting bills like it is going to be the cause of the next crisis, when the bill for decades of irresponsible fiscal policy finally comes due. It's going to be expensive. Katherine, you wrote about this bill in the New York Times. You reacted by calling it insane. Strong language. You want to unpack that for us?
Yeah, I mean, it just on the very, very basic level, this is an incredibly expensive bill. This bill adds to the national deficit and debt in a just immoral way. Like, I don't know any other way to say it. We don't have the money to do the things that are in this bill. And obviously a big part of that is the tax cuts. I think it was more or less inevitable that we would extend the current tax rates to where they are. To not have done so would have been like an economic disruption that no one was willing to tolerate, actually, despite the posturing. But there are still so many other things in this bill that simply didn't have to happen the way they happened, and that are going to put us further into and we're like not even in a fiscal hole now. We're in like a fiscal black hole. Like the laws of physics have ceased to apply. Things are just getting sucked in that like don't even seem to be involved anymore.
This is the interstellar of fiscal policy.
Yeah, except this one we can actually understand the plot.
Well, it does seem like
I'm not sure that I do, honestly.
It does seem like it has taken a very long time to get this bill passed. We've been talking about this basically since Donald Trump was inaugurated in January. This thing's been coming together actually even before that, right? And it's never been clear that it was actually going to get over the finish line because there were all of these holdouts. There were the moderate holdouts who said, well, this cuts too much from Medicaid. But then there were the conservative holdouts, folks like Thomas Massie, Rand Paul, who said, look, this thing is going to add to debt and deficits. This is going to be too much. We need to either, if we're going to cut taxes like this, then we also need to cut spending. A few folks did vote against final passage of this bill, but for the most part, Nick, the conservative holdouts didn't actually hold out. So how are you feeling about the resistance to this sort of, whatever it may be, the kind of resistance to this sort of spending and this sort of piling on of debt and deficits?
Yeah, in fact, only 5 Republicans, two congressmen and 3 senators voted against it. And only 2 of them, Rand Paul in the Senate and Thomas Massie in the House, did so because of principles. People like Tom Tillis, who's retiring, because the minute that he announced his opposition to this, Donald Trump said, "Hey, we're gonna primary this old fart," and he announced his retirement as he was saying he was not going to vote against this. It was mostly about Medicare spending and things like that. It was not about principle.
Medicaid spending, I think you mean.
Excuse me, Medicaid.
This bill trims
Medicaid,
Medicaid, but not Medicare.
Absolutely. My apologies for that. So you have to look at Rand Paul and Thomas Massie, and I'm actually kind of excited in the sense that these are the two guys. They're both from Kentucky. They're both Tea Party people who were associated with the rise of the Tea Party in the early teens. And they are doing it over principle. And they're saying it is insane that we keep spending massively much, much, much more than we ever bring in revenue. And that has got to stop. I was particularly excited by the fact that, Rand Paul called out things like the Trump baby accounts, like you can park $1,000 a year for your kid under Donald Trump if your kid is born in America and is an American citizen between 2025 and 2028. That's what the type of thing that is in this bill, where you can throw $1,000 and let it accrue, tax-free for your kid. It's nuts. This isn't even rearranging, it's not even rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic. It's like playing shuffleboard or something. This is where it becomes insane. You can't even begin to describe what's in the bill because it's too long, and then the banality of it all. We should keep tax rates the way they are. We should be simplifying the tax code. We should be broadening the base and lowering the top marginal rates. And that should be done separately from what we're talking about spending, because the way this works out, it just blows a hole in the national debt without actually giving anybody a clear picture of what are we going to spend. Here's the amount of money. Here's the amount of revenue we can bank on. How do we make these things match? Very frustrating. But what I like is, when you're down to Thomas Massie and Rand Paul against all the other idiots in Congress, I'll back them any day of the week. And I think this may be where we touch bottom and start to push up towards the surface of a neo-Tea Party movement where people actually start talking about what are we going to do in order to right the ship of state.
This is the Fight Club theory of reviving the Tea Party, right? Tyler Durden was always like, hey, Edward Norton, you got to hit bottom before you can really change your life. And maybe we've finally hit bottom here with fiscal policy.
We need to be talking in the language of Alcoholics Anonymous and recovery, unfortunately. And hopefully this is the bottom, but maybe not. You can always go a little bit further down.
Eric, let's talk about the spending reductions for Medicaid. This is the place where Republicans carved the most out of future planned spending. Democrats are already teeing up attack ads about how this $1 trillion reduction, planned reduction, will throw millions of people off of insurance. It's going to result in the closure of rural hospitals, maybe lead to thousands of deaths. Sounds a lot like what we heard with Obamacare. What do you say to all this?
Yeah, I think just to put a couple numbers on some of what's been talked about already in terms of the size of the bill before we get into the Medicaid thing, we were already before this bill passed on pace to add $22 trillion to the national debt in the next decade. $22 trillion. That was the baseline. This is from the Peterson Foundation. This legislation adds, depending on your estimate, somewhere between $4 to $5 trillion likely, depending on which of those things get extended. Nick was just talking about the child, extra little child savings account thing that only exists for 4 years. That's probably not going away after 4 years. That'll get extended. So that adds to the long-term cost. The bill is going to add more to the debt ultimately than the CHIPS Act, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, the American Rescue Plan, and the CARES Act combined did, because a couple of those were one-time things, not spread over 10 years, obviously. But that's per the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget. This is a huge budget-busting bill. When you get to the Medicaid section of it specifically, yes, Democrats obviously are attacking on this. I find some of this to be just really disingenuous because this is the only actual area where there are some spending cuts in the bill. Medicaid spending has risen by 60% since 2019 alone. It's risen more than that since the passage of Obamacare, which of course expanded eligibility for Medicaid to whole groups of new people, including lots of able-bodied adults who don't have kids. The changes that will be made here, the work requirements here that are being made in this bill don't actually apply to anyone who is disabled, pregnant, or caring for a child younger than 14. Anybody who's volunteering at least 20 hours a week, even if they're not working, or enrolled in school, trying to better themselves, trying to get a degree, things like that. So I think the work requirement
who does
here
it
is sort
apply to then? Like
it
what
applies
type of
to
person?
Yeah, I think the right way, and Peter, you know about this too. I mean, so maybe I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. But this seems like it's an attempt to chip away at some of the expansion under Obamacare of the Medicaid rolls, which obviously have proven to be just disastrously expensive for this program and really unsustainable in the long term. So it's about trying to kind of put that genie back in the box, if you will, and roll back some of that expansion there that happened. But whether this is an actual cut or not, I don't buy that argument at all. Medicaid spending is going to continue to increase under all the projections that I've seen of this bill. So it's a reduction in future spending. If you're going to call that a cut for political reasons, fine, but it's not actually a cut.
The other thing is that the reductions in future spending that are not cuts might not even happen. And part of the reason that this bill passed was that Republicans in rural districts that rely on Medicaid to fund their hospitals basically convinced those hospitals that this won't be that big a deal because ultimately these cuts will be reversed or at least heavily, maybe not completely reversed, but heavily mitigated because these cuts don't go into effect necessarily immediately. There's a clock on them in which they go into effect, and that's going to give Democrats time to make their case and maybe reverse them after if Democrats win Congress back or if there's enough pressure here. And so there's definitely a little bit of we're going to pretend to cut Medicaid spending in the future, but then maybe when we get to the future, those cuts won't actually happen, which is something that we've seen a million times before. Yeah,
right? That adds to the cost of the bill. So, yeah.
But it is true. I mean, the Republicans do want to cut Medicaid spending. Whether they do or not, I mean, they can't have it every way, right? Like where they can't be like, oh, we are being tough on, on lower income people who get Medicaid. The people who have to do the work requirement, which I think is a good idea, and I wish the Republicans, actually had a plan behind this other than kind of a vague contempt for lower income people. But the whole idea of any transfer program, the people who have to work, who have to pass a work requirement for Medicaid are people who don't have dependents, who are not handicapped or disabled, and they need to show that they are working or looking for work. Otherwise, they only get 90 days worth of benefits. That seems to me to be eminently fair, and that should be the baseline for any kind of transfer program. Essentially. That's not a bad thing. And that's actually something, if you go back far enough, Bill Clinton and the New Democrats, that was part of the way that they, they changed welfare as we knew it. And they ushered in an era when big government was over, briefly.
So I have written about work requirements for welfare for many years, and in general, I am in favor of them. I'm not sure I think that this is the best way to reduce spending on Medicaid, because basically what it's trying to do is throw people off of Medicaid because they've forgotten to log in and go through and click on all the forms. And when you've seen this tried at the state level, it has not been it has not gotten people to work again in the way that a program like this is supposed to. Again, I'm not opposed to reducing spending on Medicaid, which I think is a disastrous program in so many ways. But I think this is an attempt to try and cut Medicaid spending in a way that is sort of defensible, because you say, well, we're not even really, all we're really doing is expecting people to work, and we're only expecting a certain type of person to work. But if you go back and you look at Robert Rector, I believe it is the Heritage Policy Foundation person who was policy expert, who was a big advocate for work requirements for welfare, made, I think, a very strong case. When he looked at work requirements for Medicaid, he said, well, maybe this isn't the greatest idea. At least that was several years ago. I think that may be a little bit different now. But Katherine, I actually want to talk about a different part of this bill, or some different parts. As Nick said, there's a whole lot of just tiny little provisions in this, right? This bill doesn't just keep tax rates low. It also is packed with narrow tax carve-outs, targeted tax breaks for rum, about $2 billion, for private school attendance, for business meals, but only, according to Politico, for employees at certain Alaskan fishing boats and processing plants, with the measure stipulating that the facilities must be located in the United States north of 50 degrees north latitude, though not in a metropolitan statistical area. There was also a $1 billion provision allowing spaceports or facilities near them to sell tax-exempt bonds. So we like rum and private school and space, and we like tax breaks. Do you have any concerns about this method of building out the tax code, Katherine?
I know you're shocked to hear that I do have concerns, Peter.
Yeah.
Shocking.
Yeah.
So obviously, a simple tax code is a more fair tax code, a more just tax code, and this is the opposite of that. I also think it's really important to note that in so many of these provisions, the kind of technical fiddliness of them makes them easier to undo. So another example here, we covered this at Reason, the CAFE standards, the fuel emission standards for the vehicle fleet. You might say like, oh, okay, cool. They seem to have rolled back CAFE standards. They undid the CAFE standards. When you actually look at it, what happens is they set some of the fines for violating the CAFE standards to zero. They can't repeal them because that's not actually a thing you could do in a spending bill. What that means is it's going to ping pong right back. And I think the same thing will happen with a lot of these other, supposed cuts. They don't end up being cuts at all. And they generate a huge amount of deadweight loss as everyone scrambles around to try and comply, to try and kind of grab whatever they can grab. Good days for lawyers and accountants, not actually good days for tax freedom.
Okay, so the reason we had this tax policy drama this year was that the individual tax cuts in the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act that was passed during Trump's first term were set to expire after a decade as part of a gimmick to keep the scored cost low for that bill. This bill includes a lot more temporary provisions that are set to expire in a year or in a few years, or that don't go into effect for a couple of years. So we're going to argue about them until they do go into effect. So we are going to do this again in a few years. There's just going to be more sunsets, right? The reductions to Medicaid and food assistance don't take effect till 2028, which is the same year that some of the Trump tax cuts that Trump promised, that the tax cuts that Trump promised on the campaign trail, right, for tax carve-outs for tips and that sort of thing, are also set to expire. So Nick, I want you to contextualize this for me a little bit in the sense that libertarians often say they want policy to sunset with like agencies and programs given end dates when they are set up. So how do you feel about all of these expirations and delays that are built into this bill?
It's an extension of Trump being the king, because all of this stuff is put there because he wanted it, or some constituency that he is paying, he's paying off with this. I mean, he got, the Alaska senator to go along with this because of, the no tax on whale blubber as long as you're in a small town and somewhere in Alaska type of carve-outs at the very end. It's bad. It's a great idea to have all laws, all agencies, all appropriations bills sunset at a certain point in time. That doesn't change the fact that if the bills are built on just handing out little bits of, this or that to individuals in order to pass it, to get it passed in a particular point in time, it's good that it'll go away or that it doesn't start immediately, but that's the problem. I mean, if you go back to Obamacare, which in a lot of ways was, is the modern template for this, where supposedly an incredibly popular, piece of legislation that all Americans really wanted, but in order to drag it across the finish line, Obama at the very end had to go and beg and give what were called sweeteners or give away deals to various people like Bill Nelson of Nebraska that nobody cared about then and nobody cares about now. But that's what politics is. It sucked then, it sucks now. That's distinct from whether or not these things should go away, which I think is a good principle.
Eric, since Nick mentioned Obamacare, I want you to go back because Republicans spent so many years complaining during that process that Democrats were gaming the Congressional Budget Office with the Affordable Care Act, that they'd used smoke and mirrors and accounting gimmicks to make the cost of that bill lower on paper. But for this, for the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, Republicans used some gimmicks of their own here. And these gimmicks could backfire, right? Like you have said that some of the procedural stuff, especially with the Congressional Budget Office scoring, could lead to Medicare for all.
Yeah, I mean, in a backwards kind of way, I think it makes it easier for Democrats to pass Medicare for all. Republicans came up with kind of the biggest budget gimmick of all, or at least the biggest one we've invented so far in passing this bill. To understand how this works, you have to understand that they were using the reconciliation process to get this bill through the Senate. And the reconciliation process is basically a magic loophole in the filibuster. It means you can pass stuff through the Senate without the 60-vote threshold, which eliminates the ability of the minority to block the bill. And of course, this bill passed the Senate in the slimmest possible way. It was a tie vote. Vice President J.D. Vance cast the tie-breaking vote there. Couldn't have done that if the filibuster's in play. But the reconciliation process says you can only make revenue neutral or revenue positive changes to budgetary programs. Katherine mentioned this earlier. It's one of the reasons why you can't actually change the CAFE standards law, because it has to be a budget bill only. Okay, so to make this bill look revenue neutral for the purposes of getting it through the Senate via the reconciliation process, the Senate instructed the CBO to look at the bill on a current policy baseline, which is to say to ignore the fact that these tax cuts from 2017 were going to expire at the end of this year, and to just assume that they were continuing in perpetuity, even though, of course, that's not what they were going to do, and then to score the bill based on that assumption, which manages to hide $4 trillion, or it's the tax part of the bill is about $3.5 trillion in budget deficit hit, which is what we talked about earlier here. That's all the long-term cost of the bill. Okay, how does this get you to Medicare for all? Well, okay, if you can pass a temporary bill, which the tax cuts originally were, right? In 2017, they were temporary income tax reductions that it lasted for 8 years. If you can do that, and then at the end of that temporary period say, okay, we're going to assume that this policy continues forever and budget as if it continues forever to hide the cost of continuing that program, whatever that program is. Well, now you have a way to make anything look much cheaper than it is. And the Medicare for All example came up in some conversations that reporters were having with senators last week. Let's say, hypothetically, that the budget hit for Medicare for All would be something like $10 trillion over a decade. That's an amount of money that you would have a very difficult time getting anybody except maybe like Bernie Sanders to vote for. But if you pass a 1-year Medicare for All program that only costs, let's say, $1 trillion, okay, maybe you can get that through. Maybe Democrats can get that through. And then you come back after that 1 year and say, well, we're just going to extend this permanently. And we're going to extend it permanently on a current policy baseline. And now it costs nothing. And of course, it doesn't cost nothing. It costs the country a lot. And we'd end up borrowing a lot of dollars, just like we will to pay for this bill. But you can get it done via the reconciliation process and effectively hide the cost of the bill. So this is a massive change. It effectively kills the filibuster on any sort of budget or tax or spending issue going forward. And there are Democrats already. Alex Padilla of California, a senator from California, already more or less said in a statement he put out about the Senate vote that Democrats would remember this moment when they are next in power. So we will have this conversation again, and we will be even more bummed about it when we do.
Oh, man, that's exciting. We're going to get to do this again when Democrats try to pass Medicare for All. I don't think Medicare for All is coming next year or even before 2030. But I do think that some of the gimmicks, some of the sort of the ways this bill was set up, the kind of just blatant sort of gimmickry of it all is absolutely going to come back and bite us and going to be part of our politics for a very long time to come. And it's worrying. It's just going to make solving the already intractable fiscal problems much harder. All right, let's move on here. Republicans met their self-imposed deadline for passing the big tax and fiscal policy bill, but there is another deadline coming up on July 9th this week, which is the deadline Trump set for imposing massive new tariffs on Europe. Negotiations reportedly went on through the holiday weekend, I guess because they don't celebrate July 4th in Europe, with Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent saying he was focused on 15 to 18 agreements with foreign trading partners. Eric, I just want you to give us the lay of the land here. What is going on? What should we expect?
I just had one long rant, so I apologize. This will be another long rant. This is an absolute clown show, this whole situation. We have to back up again here and understand the history. Back in April, of course, there was the Liberation Day tariff announcements, right? Trump imposed 10% tariffs across the board on basically all imports into the country. And then there was that big board he was holding up with all the higher tariff rates on stuff depending on where it was coming from. And those higher rates were supposedly based on tariffs and other trade barriers that other countries charge on American imports into those places. That wasn't true. It was a very crude calculation based on the bilateral trade deficit that America runs with those countries, which it makes no sense. It's basically irrelevant to this whole discussion. A week later, when those higher tariffs were about to go into effect and when the stock market had tanked for 5 days straight, the Trump administration said, okay, actually, we're going to hold off on the higher tariffs. We're going to keep the 10% baseline. Everything above that goes away for 90 days. They love temporary policies. 90 days. And the White House said they're going to use those 90 days to negotiate with other countries. Peter Navarro promised 90 deals in 90 days. He went on Fox News and said that. That 90 days expires today. There have been 3 trade deals so far. None of them
less
are
than 90.
That's less than 90. It's, I'm not good at math. I think it's about 2% of 90, somewhere around that. None of them are comprehensive agreements.
Like 4%.
It's whatever it is. Yeah, you're right. 4%. None of them are comprehensive agreements. None of them are even worthy of the term trade deal, to be honest. One is with China, one is with the UK, and one is with Vietnam. And most importantly, none of them lower tariffs for Americans, which was supposedly the thing, right? It was like, oh, we're going to raise tariffs so that we can negotiate lower tariffs for everybody. We can throw that argument out the window. That's obviously what's not happening here. Look at the Vietnam deal, for example. Which was announced last week. Americans will continue paying 20 to 40% tariffs on everything that we import from Vietnam. Meanwhile, Vietnam gets no tariffs. They've eliminated all their tariffs on American exports to Vietnam. So that means people in Vietnam get tariff-free trade. People in America get higher taxes on stuff that we import. That means clothes, shoes, household goods, electronics. We get lots of stuff from Vietnam. It will all be more expensive. One of the White House's advisors described this as a one-sided deal, and he is absolutely correct about that. Even though he was claiming it was a one-sided deal that benefits America, this is not a deal that America won. Okay, so that brings us all back to today. Those higher Liberation Day tariffs are supposed to go into effect today. Will they? Yeah, I don't know. It's kind of anybody's guess. Scott Bessent continues to say that he's now eyeing a September 1st deadline. That's what he's negotiating towards. But then over the weekend, Trump was asked about this by a reporter, and he said that the new rates would be ready on July 9th. And then immediately after he said that, Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick jumped in to say, oh, actually, it's going to be August. So who the fuck knows? Like, if you're a business in America right now, good luck purchasing anything, making any sort of decisions. I spoke with a guy, Greg Sugar, who runs a tie-making business in the United States last week about this, and the ties that he makes are made out of silk jacquard. That's the name of the material, and you have to import that because we don't manufacture it here in America, and he said he has no idea what's going to happen after today. So he's waiting. Everybody's waiting. Most of the stuff that we import in this country, right, about half of all imports into this country, are intermediate goods or raw materials that go into making other things, whether it's bow ties or like Hershey's chocolate bars, and we have no idea what any of those imports are going to cost as of tomorrow. So that's where we are.
All right, temporary policy forever, and it's going to make everything more expensive. But on the bright side, maybe we won't have to wear ties. We do have to take a temporary break, but we'll be back with a listener question about masked men and what to do about them right after this. If you're tired of cable news debates and Twitter shouting matches, and you're looking for serious, good faith conversations between people who actually care about liberty, then it is time to check out the Future of Freedom podcast. Each episode dives deep into a single topic, tariffs, campus speech, Doge, and brings together 2 guests who disagree about the best path forward. But here's the twist. This isn't a debate show. No interrupting, no dunking. Each guest, whether libertarian or conservative, has to make their own case, not just tear down the other side. It's compelling, it's civil, it's genuinely challenging. You will hear familiar reasoned voices like Nick Gillespie, Stephanie Slade, and Joe Lancaster alongside other principled thinkers on the right and center right. Each brings sharp ideas to the table. So if you believe the future of freedom depends on more than just winning arguments, and you are ready for something deeper than the usual echo chambers, please check out the Future of Freedom podcast. Real disagreement, real ideas, real conversations. Subscribe to the Future of Freedom wherever you get your podcasts. That's Future of Freedom. Our listener question this week comes from Chris, and it is about masked ICE officers. One of the scariest things the Trump administration is getting away with these days is the use of federal law enforcement who are masked, not wearing uniforms or identifying information, and often traveling in unmarked cars. This is evocative of practices under authoritarian regimes. If citizens can't tell who is behind it, it's very hard to get our representatives to fight back against it. Is anyone fighting back on this in the courts? Can it be stopped by Congress if they want to, or the courts? Are there laws, judicial rulings that make this clearly illegal and unconstitutional, or will someone have to break new legal ground to get it outlawed? Nick, let's start with you. Masked ICE agents running around abducting people off of the streets without any kind of identification. It's bad.
It's absolutely horrifying. There's a good column by Mike Brock, who used to work at Block, about this at Substack that I'll put in the show notes. But this is becoming a increasingly common phenomenon, and it calls to mind, if you remember the pre-pandemic, pre-2020 HBO show The Watchmen, which featured, a bunch of police who wore masks, more than the vigilantes who they were trying to wash out. This is happening because of Trump's promise, coming through his mouthpiece, Stephen Miller, to deport, 1 million illegal immigrants a year. It is impossible to do that. If, as the Trump people originally said, they were only going after the bad hombres, people who had committed serious violent crimes since they had been in the U.S. illegally, they're not able to do that. And as a result, they are going everywhere they can and picking up anyone that they can, including American citizens from time to time. This is deeply disturbing. There are cases coming out of places like Los Angeles where there's a series of abuses like this, but it remains to be seen how the courts will respond to it, partly because there is, traditionally a wide hand given to immigration enforcement. But it's real and it is deeply problematic. And, we started this show by talking about how great America is. It's not going to be a great country if this kind of stuff gets tolerated or becomes the new normal, which is what the Trump administration is trying to do.
Katherine, what are ordinary citizens supposed to do here if you can't even tell which agency is taking people off of the streets?
Yeah, unfortunately, the you have to tell me if you're a cop thing is not true. Like there are many exceptions in the case law for that, but there is a standard generally that officers are supposed to identify themselves when they're in the course of their duties. And also the thing that we're seeing a lot with ICE is people think that they're local police when they're actually ICE agents. And that does seem to be sometimes part of an intentional misrepresentation on the part of ICE. I do anticipate that once a few cases make it through the courts, that type of behavior explicitly, narrowly will end up getting prohibited, but it doesn't solve the broader problem, which is if there's a mandate from above to do broad-based enforcement and you have some quotas to hit, people are going to bend the rules until they break. I think, we've seen some controversy over people, regular citizens, downloading an app that allows them to report when they see ICE activity in the area. I know at least one Reason staffer who has gone out of her way to, go into her favorite local places when she sees some enforcement happening on the block and say, hey, if there are any guys in the kitchen that might be a little nervous about law enforcement, maybe tell them to get out. I think that is a moral act. And I think listeners to this podcast, when they see what looks to them like what might be ICE enforcement, would do well to try and alert people that might become victims.
Eric, during the pandemic, conservatives argued that mask laws made it easier for criminals because if everyone is masked, then you can't see anybody's faces, and criminals could stick up stores, right? Go in and avoid identification this way. Doesn't this, in some ways, do kind of the same thing?
Yeah, obviously it does. Obviously, police should not be masked or hide their identity in any way, regardless of what form of law enforcement they are engaged in. Second to what Nick and Katherine said, but I mean, really, the masking thing is downstream of the broader problem here, which is the immigration enforcement needs to be, or Congress or someone needs to, put some limits on how the Trump administration is engaging here. It obviously makes it easier, and the masking issue specifically makes it easier for people to engage in bad behavior. But we don't have a great track record of holding cops accountable here, even when you can identify them in this country. So that needs to change. And I guess the last thing I'll mention is just to put kind of a personal angle on this. Isidro Perez was that 75-year-old Cuban man who died in ICE custody last week. And I think we just need to talk about this for a moment, because this is a guy who fled Cuba, fled communism, fled authoritarianism to come to this country. He was picked up off the streets of Miami, apparently because he had a marijuana conviction back in the 1980s for which he had done his, he had been punished for it. That was it. There was no new law breaking alleged. And he died in ICE custody. Now, maybe he probably died, for all we know, of entirely natural causes because he was a 75-year-old man. But the fact that he spent his final moments in the clutches of this authoritarian immigration enforcement machine when he had done nothing wrong and had lived here seemingly mostly peacefully with that one conviction outstanding for 60 years is just really disheartening. And that's a moral tragedy. And that's happening, not just to one person, but to many people. And that's a problem that we need to keep talking about.
Yeah. And if I may, to emphasize the fact that this is all over a thing that is not a problem, because the people that are being picked up in this are not violent criminals. They're not gang members. They're not people who have taken over entire state capitol buildings in Colorado or, in apartment complexes and all of these mania stories. The people who are getting picked up now are everyday people who generally and increasingly, it seems, are actually being arrested at places where they work. So it's the people who are, cutting the grass,
or when they're going to their courthouse, for their court mandated immigration hearing,
or cooking
appalling.
our food. In the first Trump term, one of the most controversial things he did was the family separation policy, and he could do hand waving and talk about how Obama did this, and Obama was terrible on immigration. There's no question about it. But that doesn't mean that Trump gets away with whatever he wants. What ended the family separation policy ultimately was the publicity around it, because people in America, and this is the people in America, not the government, love immigrants and they love immigration and they love people who come here to work hard. Most Americans are sickened when you say to Venezuelans who come here and come in through, the protected channels, temporary protected status, or are complying with asylum laws and things like that, and saying, no, we are going to pick you up and we are going to send you back to an authoritarian hellhole. American people don't like that. And the way to ultimately combat this is not going to be through the courts. We know Congress, with the exception of maybe 2 people out of all, 435 Congress people, are useless. It's going to be the American people saying, no, we will not stand for this anymore. And that, that is something that is powerful, and it's easier done than ever in an age of social media. That's what we need to be doing.
I started this episode by talking about how much I love America, and I do, I mean it. But this sort of authoritarian banana republic policy is one of the things that has me very, very worried. All right, as a reminder, we do love to answer your short, succinct, pithy, and otherwise not very long questions. In fact, you send us so many great questions that we're going to be answering some extras on our YouTube channel. Yes, we are on YouTube, wherever the internet is found. This week, we're taking a follow-up to our excellent, winning Reason versus Debate on drug legalization. You can email your questions to podcasts@reason.com. That's podcasts@reason.com. All right, we've talked a lot about the things that are wrong with American politics. But how do you fix it? Libertarians have long talked about the benefits of competitive third parties, and now Elon Musk wants one too. He built us a rocket. Can he build us a third party that works? Musk has been one of the loudest critics of the big, beautiful bill. He called it a disgusting abomination. That's probably about right. And now he wants to start the America Party to combat the kind of fiscal recklessness he sees as built in to our two-party system. He wrote on social media that when it comes to bankrupting our country with waste and graft, we live in a one-party system, not a democracy. Today, the America Party is formed to give you back your freedom. Well, I don't know what that means exactly, but Katherine, you love freedom, you love rockets. What do you think here?
I just desperately want Elon Musk to go back to doing what he's good at.
Yeah.
Listen, I'm fine. Start a party. Do whatever you want to do. The principles of this party sound like they would closely resemble my own. And so who am I to say don't start your political party? And I do think that people that are oh, well, actually, it's extremely difficult to start a political party and get ballot access. This foolish man, you're the villains. It shouldn't be difficult to start a political party, actually. And so, for Musk to act like this is a reasonable thing to do, yeah, it should be a reasonable thing to do. It's hard for lots of reasons, but he's in the right there. But my personal preference, which Elon has not asked me for, right? This is not, he doesn't give a shit. But like my personal preference would be for him
But
to
it
go
is
back.
America, right? Where your personal preference matters a lot.
The
whole idea.
I would like it if he could please go back to making rockets that don't explode. He's been having a little trouble lately. I believe in him in the long run, but it's tough out here. I would like it if he could maybe build some more cool cars. He could dig tunnels. He's so good at that stuff. And he himself said 2 weeks ago, I think I've done enough with politics. I'm going to step back. I've done enough. He was right then. Unfortunately, he is back in it.
Yeah, I feel the same way. Nick, right? Third parties are like a perennial dream of libertarians, but there are all these challenges.
Well, actually, I
mentioned,
think the perennial dream of libertarians is a second party, to be quite honest.
Yeah.
Right. Well, then this is
Yeah.
the Musk argument, is that it's effectively a one-party state already. There are all of these challenges that Katherine mentioned to forming a third party, especially a third party that has any kind of chance at winning, right? You have first past the post voting, you have ballot access issues. What do you do about that? Like, how do you... Does that mean you should just give up on the project and try to work through one of the existing two big parties?
I think increasingly, yeah. Or as our vacationing regular fourth person, Matt Welch, and I wrote in the Declaration of Independence that actually the way through a lot of this stuff is less about starting a brand new party or reviving something like the Libertarian Party, which, is not doing well and did not do well in the last in the last election cycle, is to commandeer one of the existing parties, and libertarians have worked within the Republican Party to achieve certain kinds of goals, over the past 50 years, but through ad hoc coalitions to end particular policies. And that can be stuff like tech policy and whatnot. In a way, the best parts of the Trump administration 2.0 is a result of that. And it was Silicon Valley people definitely had an effect on him in getting him to open up AI regulation, to accept cryptocurrency, or other people, not really Silicon Valley people, but other Bitcoin people working through Robert F. Kennedy and other people, managed to have a serious impact on Trump's administration priorities on a couple of things. I think that's the better way forward. I would love, as Katherine said, what Musk is talking about sounds pretty good to me. A tech favorable, and a kind of future forward party would be pretty great. I don't think that that Musk is the person to do that. He is basically, he stepped on one rake and got slapped in the face really hard, and now he seems to have taken one step over and is stepping on another rake and saying that I'm going to start this new party, which is going to change everything. Probably not going to happen.
Let me bring Eric in here on that point, because Musk just finished running. It was never quite clear what his exact title was, but he was in charge of DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency. Call him the border czar. Right?
He was the border czar of DOGE.
Right. And we were, there you go. Yeah. We were all pretty critical, all right? Like, it didn't seem like it targeted big spending drivers. It was run kind of shambolically. Does that factor into your assessment of Musk's chances here, or your enthusiasm about the new party?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I'm kind of two minds about this. It's not really two minds. It's more like a mind-heart split, I guess. Like, my heart wants this to work, man. The two-party system sucks. Smashing it would be awesome. It would be great if there was already a third party out there that had a lot of these pro-tech fiscal responsibility principles that was desperately in need of new leadership that he could just inject a bunch of money into. Yeah. That would be cool too.
Drawing a blank on that one. Yeah.
Even if this doesn't fully smash the two-party system, I believe pretty deeply at this point that the Republican coalition, that breaking the Republican coalition as it exists currently is very essential to the future of American politics. The current crop of nationalists and racists and populists that are running it need to be yeeted into the sun. And so who better to do that than a guy that builds rockets, I guess? Even if that's all this does is break up the Republican coalition and force it to play defense in a different way. That would be great. But then my head says basically all the stuff that Katherine and Nick said already. Like, it's just, this is going to be very difficult because of the ballot access requirements. And to your point, Peter, about Doge, like, I think it faces some of the same problems there. Like, this is Musk bringing in the mentality where he says, I can spend a bunch of money and use my influence on Twitter to bring about different policy ends or different political ends in this case. And he's going to run into the same problem he ran into with Doge, which is that that's just not how it works. You actually need to have like attention span. You need to actually have, in the case of forming a new political party, like lots of lawyers and lots of volunteers who are going to go out there and get you signatures just to get on the ballot. This is a much harder road ahead than I think he thinks it is. And so, I wish him the best, but I don't think this is going to work out too well.
An attention span? Who has that anymore? I mean, I guess he's like the number one Diablo 4 player on the planet or something because he pays people in China to play for him, maybe. Allegedly.
No, I think it's his kids. He can give them, $1,000 a year now, forever, right? Under
That's
the
true.
new Trump
he can
bill.
open one of those accounts.
And he's
It'll
got
be
an
nice.
army of children, like thousands of them, right? He's going to become very rich off of that.
This is what that policy was just made for Elon Musk, very obviously. All right. Let's move on from this. Katherine, we are going to talk about our cultural recommendations here. What have you been consuming? What has been consuming your attention span, which is very long? You focus very well.
I actually did read a pretty long and complicated book, so I will take credit for that, I guess. I read Anne Rowe's book, Pontius Pilate, which is a re-examination from every single angle, kind of a kaleidoscopic approach to understanding this major figure in world history about whom we know very little. And it is a hard read in the sense that she is trying to do a thing that is not intuitive. So she basically is telling many versions of every aspect of the story of Pontius Pilate's life. And it's the template, obviously, is the Gospels. Like, what if we had 4 versions of a story that was like, each one was a little different in an important way? It's sort of that over and over and over. It also is sprinkled with historical parallels. So we have, what that story looks like from Tolstoy's vantage point. We have what that story looks like from, the British Raj's vantage point. Cuba as well, communist Cuba. And so there's this kind of just very diverse, wacky, confusing, interesting treatment of this figure. I took away an anti-authoritarian message, unsurprisingly. The sort of scene of the trial when Jesus is tried is a story ultimately of a polycentric legal order where all of the authorities fail to do justice and to meaningfully pursue justice. And I think there is certainly a libertarian or anarchist reading of that story, and this book really brought that to the fore for me. So, Anne Rowe's Pontius Pilate.
I also read a novel recently, Stop All the Clocks by Noah Kuhlman, who is the editor of the Mars Review of Books. Just a great name for a literary journal. This is a good, it's a good novel. It's got a lot of elements that I think will appeal to Roundtable listeners. It's got an AI that writes poetry, a dead rich tech investor. There's a lot of sort of discussion about the ennui of living alone in New York and maybe trying to not look at your phone all the time. It's a sort of a thriller about the modern age and the modern condition and the difficulty of knowing what's true and what's real in an era of grand and strange technological ambition. It's just a good short book. It's only like 250 pages. You can read this in an evening, maybe 2. Strongly recommend this as just a really smart new debut novel from Noah Kuhlman. It's Stop All the Clocks. Nick, what do you have for us?
I read How to Lose Your Mother, which is a memoir by Molly Jong Fast, who's a friend of mine and who's the daughter of Erica Jong, who wrote one of the best-selling novels in American history, Fear of Flying, which, along with Memoirs of an Ex-Prom Queen in the Women's Room, back in the late 60s, early 70s, was one of the kind of trilogy of high second-wave feminist novels about women kicking off the shackles of sexual respectability and being stuck in kind of a patriarchal society and breaking out of that. Molly's book is about her mother, who is still alive but has dementia, and having to deal with taking care of her mother, who she had a very vexed relationship with. It's an interesting meditation on literary fame and how fleeting that actually is and how destructive that is to interpersonal relationships. And it's so if you're interested in kind of feminist politics or feminist culture, this is an incredible coda to what began 50 years ago, really, as an extremely powerful and virtually completely successful liberation movement on the part of women. It also factors into, I think it's a look at the future as more and more Americans who are, either Gen X, millennials, and even Gen Z are going to be dealing with their parents as they fade, not just physically but mentally. So it's a fascinating look at how do you deal with a parent who you have a complicated, ambivalent relationship with while they're dying, and how do you come to terms with that, along with all of the other shit that is going on in your life? If you are an ambitious person, and Molly is nothing if not a very smart and savvy understander that she's living in a world that, in a profound way, was made possible by the work of her mother and other people to make it easier just to do whatever you wanted as a woman in America. So in that way, it's kind of the female version of Philip Roth's Patrimony from a few decades ago, where he talked about taking care of his father as he failed. But How to Lose Your Mother, it's a great history and a personal memoir history of the past 50 years, and I suspect a really prescient look at what's going to be happening across American households for the next half century as well.
Eric, did you read a book, or are you going to be the only person?
Yeah, I didn't get the
else?
memo about the book thing, apparently. I watched Sinners this weekend, which was fantastic, but I know, Peter, you talked about that on this podcast a few months ago, so I'm actually going to do a bit of a throwback so Reason just put out our first travel issue, right, and it's fantastic. Credit to Katherine for the idea and the execution. It's beautiful. 34 places to find freedom. I should have pitched this for that issue, and I didn't, so I'm going to talk about it now. A few years ago, I went to Gdansk, Poland, with my girlfriend, a couple mutual friends of ours. And if you ever go to Gdansk, you should do it the way we did, which is you should stay with an elderly woman who can tell you all the stories of the Soviet era and everything that's come since then. In this case, that woman was my friend's aunt. She lives there in one of these big old Soviet block apartment buildings that still dominate parts of the city. Like, it just goes on and on for as far as you can see. It's kind of stunning. And you'll want to stay there for two reasons. First is that she will give you a lot of vodka, like so much vodka, just shots after shots after shots of vodka. Amazing
Never
hospitality.
Vodka. No.
Always welcome. The second reason, though, is that you'll be able to walk down those concrete steps, and 2 blocks away, you'll walk into a gorgeous, modern 21st century shopping mall that contains within it one of the biggest grocery stores I have ever seen this side of like a Costco. And that contrast is really remarkable. Like, you see the past and the present and the future of Poland, which recently became now the 20th biggest economy in the world. It just surpassed Switzerland. It's a remarkable story what Poland has done in the last 30 years since it threw off communism. And so if you can't do all of that very personal version of Gdansk, what you can do while you're there is go check out the Solidarity Museum, the Solidarność Museum, which is right down in the shipyards where Lech Walesa and the Solidarity movement. Reason talks positive things about labor movements. Here's the thing, right? Where they helped to organize and throw off the chains of communism back in the late 1980s and into the 1990s. And it's a terrific museum. Some of the memory is a little bit hazy because of all the vodka, but I remember it being a really kind of personal. There's a lot of very personal like details in the museum about people, not just in the 80s with the Solidarity movement, but even before that in the 50s and 60s and 70s, kind of laying the groundwork for, keeping really the flames of freedom and individuality alive in Poland so that when this mass movement came along, it could succeed. And that was really terrific. And so it's great to see, a country like that move from where it was 30 years ago to where it is today, and hopefully even better things to come in the future. So probably not a city, I should say, that's on a lot of Americans' travel travel destination list, but it's like a real short flight from Copenhagen and a quick train ride from Berlin. So check out Gdansk, Poland, if you ever get the chance.
Go to Poland. Drink vodka. At least you'll enjoy the vodka. That's our show, folks. Before we go, just one more reminder. The Reason Roundtable will be coming at you live in New York City at the Village Underground on July 15th. That is next week, Tuesday, July 15th. Join us as we talk about the news and answer your questions. So many questions. It's going to be so hot and so much fun. You can get tickets and more information at reason.com/events. As always, if you like this podcast, you can support us by going to reason.com/donate. That's reason.com/donate. Thank you so much for listening. The Reason Roundtable will return in New York City next week.
Oh, Angeline, girl, I've seen you crying. What you're saying